There is a particular kind of content that has become very popular. It goes something like this. Some women never truly grow up. They remain emotionally stuck at a childhood stage. Jung revealed that real psychological maturity isn't just aging, it is the courage to face your shadow. The post gets 4,000 saves. The comments fill with women typing, "This is terrifying, and I felt this in my chest, and why does this describe me so perfectly?" and buried in the mechanics of that exchange. In the naming, the categorizing, the gentle horror of recognition. Something has already happened that nobody noticed. A judgment was completed before an understanding was attempted. This is worth sitting with, because the concept itself, the eternal girl, the Puella Aeterna, is real. It has a precise clinical history. Marie-Louise von Franz spent decades on it. It describes something genuine about how certain psyches organize themselves, how they invest their energy, what they spend their lives protecting. But by the time it reaches a 9-slide carousel with 4,000 saves, it has been converted into something else entirely. It has become a label that explains by dismissing. A category that, once applied, makes further inquiry feel unnecessary. She is immature. Case closed. Next, this is what we mean when we say the diagnosis has a conflict of interest. Every framework that names a psychological pattern also, in the naming, positions itself as the authority that gets to say when the pattern ends. The person reading the post doesn't just learn about Puella Aeterna. She learns that the person who understands it, who can describe it, categorize it, deliver it in clean paragraphs, is further along than she is. The diagnosis creates a hierarchy, and the hierarchy has a vested interest in her remaining somewhere below it. We will come back to this. For now, before the insult, there was a structure. Before the structure, there was a logic, and the logic was not hers alone. James Hollis, writing about the psychological demands of midlife, makes a point that most people miss entirely. He is not talking about Puella when he says it. He is talking about all of us. He says we have confused maturity with functional adaptation. The person who appears to have it all together, who meets their deadlines, maintains their relationships, moves through the world without visible disruption, may be no less developmentally arrested than anyone else. They are simply arrested at a socially legible address. We do not pathologize the person whose developmental halt is quiet and productive and respectable. We pathologize the one whose halt is visible. Keep that asymmetry in mind. She is not afraid of adulthood. She is afraid of becoming irreversible. Marie-Louise von Franz was a Swiss analytical psychologist, one of Jung's closest collaborators, and she spent the 1950s and 60s doing something that almost no one in her field was doing. She read fairy tales as psychological documents. In 1970, she published the lectures that became pure Eternists, the eternal boy, the eternal youth, the figure who lives always in the realm of possibility, always at the threshold of beginning, never quite arriving at the thing itself. A few clarifications that most popularizations get wrong. First, this is not about youthfulness. The Puella Aeterna is not defined by energy, spontaneity, or a refusal to take life seriously. Those can be present, but they are symptoms, not the structure itself. Second, this is not about irresponsibility. The Puella can be highly conscientious, deeply sensitive, acutely attuned to what others need. She can hold a job, maintain a household, move through the world in ways that look, from the outside, entirely functional. Third, and this is the thing von Franz actually said that gets left out of every 9-slide carousel. The Puella is not failing to invest her energy, she is investing it in possibility rather than incarnation. That is a precise psychological claim. It means something specific. In Jungian terms, libido, psychic energy, is always being directed somewhere, it is always in motion. The question is never whether it is invested, but what it is invested in. In the psyche organized around the Puella pattern, the investment goes into potential, into the version of things that hasn't happened yet. Into the future self, the next relationship, the life that will begin once certain conditions are met. The energy is real. It is considerable. It simply flows away from what is and toward what could be. This creates a very specific phenomenology. The Puella experiences life most intensely at the moment of beginning. The new job, the new person, the new city, the new project, all of it is alive with possibility, and then something shifts. The job becomes routine, the person becomes known, the city becomes ordinary, the project becomes work. and the energy moves again toward the next beginning. Von Franz's key observation, the thing that separates her work from pop psychology dismissal, is that this pattern has a logic. It is not random, it is not mere laziness or fear of commitment, though those may be part of what it looks like from the outside. It is a coherent organization of the psyche around the protection of something. The question she spends the book trying to answer is, what is she protecting? What would be lost if she arrived? And here is where the symmetry with the pure becomes important, because it is also where the gendered reading reveals its limitation. The pure Aeternus presents in men. The Puella Aeterna presents in women. Von Franz analyzed them as structurally parallel. The same archetypal refusal of incarnation, the same libidinal investment in potential over actuality, the same terror of the life that would result from full commitment to the one that exists. But they do not develop in identical conditions, because the culture that a pure grows up in tells him you can afford to wait. Your potential is your value. The man who hasn't quite found himself yet retains a kind of mystique. The culture that a Puella grows up in tells her something adjacent, but not identical. Your youth is your value. Your openness is your charm. Your not yet-ness is what makes you worth wanting. And then, when she remains in that state past the age at which it is culturally legible, when she is 35 and still living in the next version of herself, the same culture that produced that condition turns around and calls it a pathology. This is not an excuse for the pattern. It is a demand for precision about where the pattern comes from. Before you apply the label, follow the genealogy. Marion Woodman was a Jungian analyst who did something unusual in the 1980s. She took the question of why certain women remained psychologically stuck, and she moved the answer out of the head and into the body. Her 1982 book Addiction to Perfection is not, despite what the title might suggest, a book about perfectionism in the conventional sense. It is a book about the relationship between feminine psychology and embodiment, about what happens when the psyche refuses to fully inhabit the body, about why that refusal is not weakness but, in its own terms, a highly sophisticated operation. Here is the claim that matters for us. What we call immaturity is often a precision instrument. The Puella's resistance to arriving, her insistence on living in the possible, in the not yet, in the open future, is not a failure of will or discipline or courage. It is a defense system, and defense systems exist for reasons. They protect something that the organism has assessed as requiring protection. What is being protected? To understand Woodman's answer, you have to understand what the body represents in this schema. The body is where fantasy becomes limit. The body ages. Every year that passes in a body is a year in which certain possibilities have closed. The 20-year-old who has not yet decided what she wants to be retains all the paths. The 40-year-old body has already made certain decisions, not through deliberate choice, necessarily, but through the accumulation of time, through what it has and hasn't done. Through what it has and hasn't become, the body chooses, not abstractly, but concretely. Every real choice is the death of alternatives. You cannot simultaneously commit to this relationship and maintain the fiction that the perfect relationship is still out there, waiting. You cannot commit to this city and preserve the possibility of being a different person in a different place. To choose in the body is to close. The body bears repetition. The first time you do something, a job, a relationship dynamic, a way of spending Saturday mornings, it is full of the potential to mean anything. By the 100th time, it is what it is. The body has lived it into specificity. Repetition in the body is the opposite of potential. The body registers consequence. The choices you made in the body left marks on the body, the relationships, the years, the habits, the accumulated history of what you have and haven't done. The body is not a neutral medium, it is a record. This is what the Puella cannot live in, not because she is incapable, not because she is fragile, but because the body is the site where all possible selves collapses into the one self that has actually been lived, and the protection of all possible selves is the structural core of the Puella pattern. Woodman goes further. She says, the defense is sustained by perfection, not perfect performance, but the fantasy of the perfect version, the perfect relationship that hasn't been ruined by the mundane, the perfect self that hasn't been compromised by the ordinary, living at the level of image, of possibility, of the ideal form that has not yet been subjected to the friction of actual life, is a way of staying perfect. The body is imperfect. The body is specifically, irreversibly, inescapably imperfect. It is this body, this face, this history, these scars, these particular years, this accumulating irreversibility. To inhabit it fully is to give up the image, and here is where we return to Hollis, the person who has arrived, who is organized, functional, legible, may have solved this problem not by resolving it, but by choosing a different form of protection. The overwork, the achievement, the perpetual productivity. These are also ways of staying at the level of the next goal, the next project, the next version of oneself. The Puella lives in possible futures. The socially functional adult may be living in a permanent present tense of striving, which amounts to the same investment in not yet. The address is different. The underlying refusal may not be. She is not afraid of adulthood. She is afraid of becoming irreversible, and the body is where irreversibility lives. There is a myth from ancient Sumer, one of the oldest written stories we have, in which a goddess descends into the underworld. Her name is Inanna. She is queen of heaven and earth. She has power, beauty, authority, divine status, and she chooses to go down at each of the 7 gates of the underworld. She is required to surrender something: her crown, her robe, her lapis lazuli beads, her golden ring, her breastplate, her measuring rod, her royal garments. At each gate, she protests. At each gate, the gatekeeper says, "The laws of the underworld are perfect and may not be questioned." By the time she reaches the bottom, she has nothing. She is naked. She is killed and hung on a hook. This is not a metaphor for self-improvement. This is not a story about becoming your best self. This is a myth about what actual transformation costs. Sylvia Brinton Pereira, in her analysis of the Inanna myth, makes a point that every contemporary version of the growth narrative misses. The descent is not therapeutic. It does not make you more. It makes you less. It strips you of precisely the things that gave you standing, beauty, power, protection. The question Pereira asks, and this is the only question that matters for our purposes, is what would have to be surrendered for the Puella to arrive? Not effort, not confidence, not a more disciplined morning routine. The thing that would have to be surrendered is the one thing that makes her feel safe, the not-yetness that keeps her lovable, the open future that makes her worth waiting for, the vulnerability that functions as both shield and currency, the identity organized around "I am someone who has not yet fully become." This is what we mean by consenting to diminishment. Not the diminishment of defeat, not the diminishment of giving up, but the specific diminishment that comes from agreeing to become particular, to be this, specifically, rather than anything at all, to be known rather than mysterious, to be ordinary rather than potential, to be here rather than everywhere. The self-help version of this story promises that if you go through the descent, you will come out transformed and powerful and more fully yourself. And Inanna does return from the underworld eventually. But Pereira is not using this myth to promise transformation. She is using it to describe what the threshold actually asks of you. The Puella's refusal is not irrational. It is a rational assessment of what is being demanded. What is being asked is, give up the version of yourself that has not yet been limited by reality. Give up the relationship with your own potential that has sustained you. Give up the story in which the best version of your life is still ahead of you and intact. Most people do not do this. Most people find quieter accommodations. They stay in the not yet but move it to a different domain. They commit to the relationship but withhold from the job. They commit to the career but withhold from the relationship. They locate the openness somewhere that feels less like loss. This is not failure. It is very human. It is the ordinary negotiation that most people make with the demands of a fully inhabited life. But it is worth knowing that this is what is happening. Worth knowing the shape of the choice. Worth knowing that what feels like I haven't found the right thing, yet maybe I have not yet consented to the diminishment that any particular thing requires. Inanna was stripped at every gate, and the gatekeepers did not apologize. Let us return to the 9-slide carousel, 4,000 saves, 292 comments. A confident voice explaining why some women remain psychologically childlike, what Jung said about it, and what you should do to finally grow up. I want to ask a question that the carousel does not ask about itself: who benefits from the Puella remaining in need of instruction? This is not a conspiracy theory, it is a structural observation. Look at what the contemporary therapeutic industrial ecosystem requires to sustain itself. It requires you to be in process, not arrived, not finished, not done. In process, the person who is whole and needs nothing is not a customer, not a follower, not an audience member. She generates no content engagement, no return visits, no algorithmic retention. She has no reason to save the next post. The self-improvement economy depends on your believing that the version of you that is actually sufficient is still ahead of you, that there is a next insight, a next framework, a next piece of content, a next therapeutic modality that will finally close the gap between who you are and who you should be. This is the structure of managed immaturity, not anyone's deliberate plan, but a systemic pressure operating at the level of incentive that rewards the discourse of becoming and punishes the discourse of being. The person who announces she is fine, not in a defensive way, but in a settled way, a way that requires nothing from the outside. In this economy, a failure. She is not generating content. She has not shared her journey. She has not documented her growth. She has nothing to sell and nothing to buy. She is also, incidentally, impossible to control. This is the thing that almost never gets said in the content that tells women to finally grow up. A woman who does not need to be rescued cannot be governed by the promise of rescue. The diagnosis of immaturity, in all its compassionate, Jungian, inflected, psychologically sophisticated form, is also an instrument. It identifies a lack. It positions the one who names the lack as closer to wholeness than the one who has it named, and it keeps both parties, the diagnoser and the diagnosed, oriented toward a destination that justifies continued consultation. Every voice that tells you it is time to grow up is offering itself as the next authority you grow up toward. The diagnosis was never neutral. It had a vested interest in your remaining in need of instruction. This is not to say that the Puella pattern is not real. It is real. Von Franz was describing something that genuinely constrains certain psyches. The refusal of incarnation has real costs, to the person inside it and to the people who try to be close to her. But the content that explains it to you is not von Franz. It is something that has taken von Franz's precision, removed the ambivalence, removed the structural critique, removed the question of who profits from the diagnosis, and replaced all of it with a clear moral arc. You have a problem. Here is the name of your problem. Here is how you fix it. That is not analysis. That is management. And what is being managed, kept legible, kept in motion, kept oriented toward the next corrective, is you. She is not afraid of adulthood. She is afraid of becoming irreversible. She was never waiting to grow up. She was waiting for a version of life that would not close. The question is not whether she should stop waiting. The question is who told her the waiting was the problem, and what they needed from her answer. Thus spoke Psyche.